Welcome to the Resource Podcast, where we take a slightly sassy, fully feminist approach to creating healthy relationships and a joyful life. I'm your host, Tatiana Thompson, and I'm a licensed professional counselor practicing in both Arizona and Minnesota. I specialize in applying clinically proven techniques like EMDR, parts work, and neural reprogramming to help you see real, lasting change in your everyday life. Just remember, I am a licensed therapist, but I'm not your therapist. This show is for informational purposes only, and it's not a replacement for seeking personal mental health or medical advice. So join me now as we explore simple strategies for breaking toxic relationship patterns and applying simple mental health tools to your daily life. Learn how to take the small steps today that will guide you to your best life tomorrow. Hello and welcome to the Resourced Podcast, the show that teaches you to question everything you thought you knew about relationships and mental health for people who want more than just ordinary, for people who want to live an extraordinary life. I'm your host, Tatiana Thompson, and I am on a mission to help 1,000 women become emotionally and financially independent so they can choose a relationship instead of needing one. To that end, today I want to talk about something so important, and that is why we have to stop waiting for our partners to change when we're in toxic or abusive relationships. And spoiler alert, I know this sounds horrible to say, but they don't change, and we all know this deep in our hearts. I know it's a pretty bold statement from a therapist because I'm a person who literally makes my living on the premise that people can change, but I think we're dealing with different types of people. I would argue that most of the people who are truly taking therapy seriously and are therefore making changes are the ones who are typically being mistreated in those dynamics. And they're actually coming to therapy to try to change that dynamic with their partners. So they're the overgivers, the overfunctioners in the relationship. Because people can change, but they have to believe there's a need to go to the trouble. And I can't say I've come across, honestly, at this point, a single toxic partner who sees that need in themselves. And I've seen them in my office. I've seen them come in. I can usually spot them. I'm not saying I can spot all of them because some of them obviously slip through the cracks. They didn't hit my radar. But I work with clients every day who are trying to change themselves to fix their toxic partner or dynamic. But they're essentially in it alone because their partner isn't invested in changing. And this is so, honestly, it's so sad to watch because we're trying to change the wrong thing, because these people are amazing. They are smart. They're successful. They're kind. And ultimately, they're carrying the whole relationship or the whole family. But they continue to stay in toxic or abusive relationships under that pretense that if they just try harder, if they just explain it a different way, if they just make their partner understand, they'll be able to change the relationship. But the worst part is their partners never change. It is truly heartbreaking, and I see this day in and day out. So instead of trying to change the dynamic in their relationship by changing their partners, we have to work through their patterns of codependency, of earning love, how they were trained to think that if you tolerate mistreatment, it's going to get better, that if you're kind enough, it's going to get better. You can kill them with kindness. That means that once we've done enough work on the healing journey, they start to get fed up with their partner, and they even start to get the ick. And if they stick around long enough, they will usually file for divorce or end the relationship, but from a different place where they're just so much more in line with themselves and happier with themselves. I do want to drill this home. When I can spot a client like that, I'm not just going, get out, get out, get out. Our goal is to see if we can make the relationship work. So that means we're working on boundaries and teaching the client how to make positive bids for growth to their partner. So ultimately saying, hey, I'd like you to grow with me. Will you join me? And that's so important because it's not just about like dumping somebody who's not working. We want to give them the opportunity to grow with us. But in most of these cases, I don't see that the partner's willing to do their own individual therapy, which, by the way, gotta say, that is a necessary step, not just couples therapy, because if you've got two people who have dysfunctional ways of thinking coming into couples therapy, that's a whole other mess, okay? If there is real dysfunction in a relationship, both parties need to be doing individual as well, okay? So in the end, If their partner doesn't want to grow, which in most of these cases, they don't know how to, they're not willing, whatever the case may be, the client that I'm usually working with, again, I also can work with the difficult end of this. The client usually has to choose themselves, and that means that they're going to avoid eternal resentment. So I want to tell you, a couple episodes ago, I covered the qualities that partners must have to allow for a relationship to thrive. It's a wonderful episode because it's all about the positives and what you can build in your relationship and what you can build in yourself. So I definitely recommend checking out that as well. It kind of is a nice counter to what I'm about to discuss, because right now we're going to cover all the ick. We're going to cover what makes a relationship not just wither, but die with no hope of resuscitation. And I do want to say again, I do have, admittedly, a rather pessimistic view on this. It doesn't mean there is no hope. I just haven't seen it yet. And that's sad, but it's true. So let's get started. First of all, I want to categorize relationships on 3 general tiers. We've got thriving, and that's the one I covered in that other episode. That's going above and beyond, actively invested in growth from both parties. And again, that's an opportunity to listen to that other episode. Then we've got kind of like basic mediocre, just getting by. So little engagement from each other, not really growing with each other, but there's no real direct conflict or harm taking place other than just this general sense of apathy. As a side note, we'll get to the harm of that in another episode. It's just not so erosive. And then there's this whole level that I'm going to put like 3 different negative levels in. We've got unhealthy, toxic, and abusive. And I'm categorizing them in the same tier because they have a lot of the same effects. They're eroding trust, and they're leaving one person oftentimes over-functioning and confused. I will acknowledge sometimes in an unhealthy or toxic level, there could be a lot of dysfunction on both ends of this. And to be fair, there's always dysfunction on both ends when we're dealing with an unhealthy relationship. It's just one of the people tends to be more problematic, leaning more into narcissistic behavior, and one person ends up being the overfunctioner in the relationship and very codependent in that way. Please understand, when I say codependent, that is not an accusation. It is something most of us are struggling with. So I like to use these tiers as a visual descriptor because you can think of them as above and below water, like the water line. With a basic relationship that's right at water's level, your heads are technically above water, but it's not super secure or easy to stay there. And it's just kind of uncomfortable just always keeping your heads just barely above water. With a thriving relationship, you're well above water. You're probably on a nice boat with no risk of sinking. But in a toxic or abusive relationship, you're constantly getting dragged underwater and maybe even at risk of drowning, quite literally, well, not literally drowning, but literally dying from the relationship. This is also where we can get to the point of actual homicide. And we all know logically that we should never be in a situation where we're being dragged down underwater by somebody else, but that doesn't make it easy to leave. And in fact, it's really profound how an unhealthy partnership whittles away at our sense of self and agency so effectively that it makes it harder to leave than maybe at the beginning of the relationship when we had better self-sense of worth. Here at Resource Counseling, we believe everyone can have an extraordinary life and that everyone's extraordinary looks different. If you're ready to take your relationships and your life to the next level, be sure to subscribe to my email list in the show notes. Get free tools, practical weekly tips that you can apply immediately to your life, and become part of our inner circle so you can start living your own extraordinary life today. Another analogy I love to use is something I've dubbed the lemonade formula. And it's even better at demonstrating this dynamic than the last one because it really tears it all out. So it's demonstrating how unhealthy, toxic, and abusive relationships become unfixable once certain ingredients are introduced to a relationship. So let's go with this assumption that you and your partner form a beautiful glass of lemonade. And since you are just so sweet, we're going to assume you're the sugar of the equation. Maybe your partner is the lemon juice. They're absolutely delicious when mixed with the right ingredients, but they have a little edge to them. So you guys can get along great when you're just mixing a nice glass of water and you taste delicious together because you balance each other out nicely. You can enjoy this lemonade that you make together. But when you start to introduce unhealthy behaviors, and right now we're going to call unhealthy behaviors things like the Gottman Four Horsemen, we're actually only going to include 3 of them. As you'll notice from the other episode, the Gottman Four Horsemen are criticism, defensiveness, stonewalling, and then the one that's going to be moved into toxic or abusive is contempt. But for now, let's say we start introducing harsh startups, criticism, you never do this. Why do you do this? Defensiveness. Well, you never do your thing, blah, 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 instead of taking accountability. And stonewalling, where we give each other the silent treatment or disengage from arguments and never come back to it. And we flood emotionally during fights. When we introduce those types of behaviors to a relationship, it isn't necessarily immediately going to break it down. However, note, the Gottmans have documented statistically that if these things stay in a relationship, the relationship is doomed. But when you're adding those behaviors, it's like adding salt to your drink. A few doses are natural, they're going to happen, but it's still drinkable. In fact, you probably can't even notice the salt yet. But if you keep adding more doses of these behaviors, your lemonade starts to taste salty, which, makes it a little less appealing, right? But chronically adding more salt will make the lemonade undrinkable. It's not necessarily toxic, but it's definitely unpalatable. So you'll end up kind of avoiding it. And unfortunately, you just keep adding salt because you're avoiding it and you're doing all of those behaviors that are problematic. The good news in this case is that salt is fixable. You can desalinate your drink. It will take work, but it's doable if both parties participate and make the effort. You'll probably need some outside intervention to detoxify this drink, but it's doable. So let's take that up a notch. Let's consider what happens when we add some toxicity to the relationship. And this is so all of these can border into abusive as well. And really, they are problematic. We're talking about power struggles, threats to leave during fights, the inability to take accountability on a broader scale, unfounded jealousy and trying to control you through that, pressure for physical intimacy that's out of context. And you'll notice again, a lot of these will slide into abuse. I'm using the light end of the spectrum here. So when these are introduced to a relationship, okay, bear with me here, this is going to get gross. This is like having one of you pee into your joint lemonade. It's really gross, and it makes it moderately unhealthy to drink, although you might not call it dangerous. Furthermore, it's a lot harder to filter out that pee of the drink, at least even just to be aware, like, that's gross. I know pee was in there. I don't want to drink that anymore. It may not be impossible to filter out, but you would certainly need professional level filtering services, right? And I would argue that in most cases, a relationship like this is probably beyond repair once it's hit that toxic level. Not to say that it couldn't be reparable, but it's unlikely with these types of behaviors that both parties will be able or willing to address their part. And that is absolutely necessary, especially the person peeing into the lemonade. And again, once somebody reaches a level of doing that, there becomes such a blur of shame and frustration from that person. They would have to take so much accountability that it becomes almost intolerable, because to begin with, we got here from a fear of accountability, right? So now there's so much backlogged shame and problematic behavior and learned behavior that it is very hard to change that. Okay, so now let's take that to the next level, the final level. Imagine adding in abuse. So let me talk about what abuse could look like. And this is not an exhaustive list, and neither were any of the others. That could look like name calling and character attacks. For example, you're such a bitch, or you're just lazy. Like, what is wrong with you? These fall under a lot of that contempt where I'm disgusted by you. I'm repulsed by you. And I know I will admit I've fallen under these for sure. Many of us have. This has to be changed. I think we think it's normal, but it's not. It's not healthy. It's not reasonable. And if we sat back and said, if someone ever said things like that to me, how would I feel? Would I feel safe in the relationship? And the answer is no. So if we are participating in those things, we do need to adjust that. Also under that is yelling, like screaming at each other, demeaning each other. Again, that kind of falls under character attacks, must be addressed. Gaslighting. So convincing somebody that their perception of reality is not true. Then we move into like a broad thing, which I think all of these things are, okay, let me just say what it is. Control tactics. So everything in abuse is a form of control tactic, but some of these are a little more subtle. You can go from outright threats to very subtle forms of like punishment for, if you make a misstep. Those can look like silent treatment, prolonged lectures. I cannot tell you how often I hear that when somebody has a narcissistic partner, that once they make a mistake, their partner just literally talks at them for upwards of hours. By the way, it doesn't have to be hours to know that you're in an unhealthy dynamic, okay? There could be other control tactics like threats to the relationship, like if you do this, I'm leaving, or even just passive threats. As soon as you upset your partner, they start packing their bag. That's a threat. There could be coercion to avoid people who care about you. This is a great strategy. I do still think many of these people do it subconsciously, but essentially they punish you for spending time with people who love you. And that's really smart because it helps you get isolated so that you're less likely to feel that you're worthy of better treatment and not have a lot of support around you. There's also the strategy of coercion to make you financially dependent. I see this all the time, and it can be very, very subtle, like someone who is expected to be the stay-at-home parent, and then the other person goes to work but also controls all of the money in a very coercive way. Deeply problematic. Okay, and again, the person who's staying at home doesn't necessarily see that. They are the frog in the pot of water that eventually boils. They think, well, my partner's supporting me. I mean, they're doing their part. They're a good person for doing this. But any partner who's supporting you in that way, you're supporting them. You're making it possible for them to go to work by taking care of their children. They're not some godsend. Not to say that what they're doing isn't valuable, but you both get to control that money. That is money that is now coming home to the family pot, not just this person gets to dole it out as they deem fit. That is not fair. So other forms of abuse would look like unwanted, touched, or forced sexual acts. Yes, marital rape is a thing. No, it did not become illegal until very recently, which is so sad, but it is wrong. It is abusive. And then we've got betrayals of any kind. We've got adultery. We've got financial betrayals are huge, but any betrayal of, I thought I could trust you. You convinced me I could. And then at the end of the day, you broke my trust. I would even say chronically not doing what you say you're going to do is a betrayal of this magnitude. You are showing your partner that you do not care about how they feel enough that they cannot trust you or count on you. And then we move into outright violence. That's the obvious one that everybody knows about. Pushing, even just physically intimidating, threatening you, bringing out weapons, even if it's just to scare you. Again, that's a control tactic, but it's also very threatening. And let us not forget the overall risk to women of homicide by their partner. I don't remember the statistics, but it's ridiculously high how many women are killed by their intimate partner. Oftentimes shortly after the relationship has ended, but it can happen during the relationship. If you are in an abusive relationship, please, even if it hasn't gotten physical yet, okay? If you are in a relationship with any level of these behaviors and you are the victim of it, I really, really, really cannot say strongly enough, please get your own individual therapy. Please also work with a shelter for abused individuals. You do need support, and you need to work through what's keeping you there and gain some agency and autonomy, especially probably financially, but emotionally as well, which again, that's my whole mission here. But beyond that, you also need to get pragmatic. If you leave someone like this, you are at the highest risk of being killed by your intimate partner during that time when you are leaving. This person is more likely to act even further out of character and take things to extreme levels. So please get that support so that you can be strategic about this. But even at minimum, get the support, not even with the intention of leaving, because I know that that's not that simple. Get the support so that you can start understanding what's keeping you there. And so that you can break this cycle, because if you have children, I'm so sorry. You are teaching them that this is okay, and they will end up in similar relationships, statistically speaking. So break this cycle for them, if not for yourself. I want you to break it for you. but I want to give you extra motivation. Moving on, all of these behaviors in the abusive category are equivalent, again, bear with me, to your partner shitting in your lemonade. Doesn't matter if it's just a little tiny amount or if it's a big amount. We don't care how much shit is in our lemonade. It makes it disgusting to drink and frankly unsafe. No amount of filtering is going to get that out of there. And even if technically you could say that the components are out, you got memory. There's shit in your lemonade. You do not want that, okay? Given how overtly harmful abuse is, having a partner truly change and fix the situation is profoundly rare. I have yet to see a viable example in my professional or personal life, and I'm really sorry to say that, but it's true. And I want you to look at your own experiences. Can you name any person in your life who treated people in that way and eventually saw the light of their ways and genuinely changed? If you can, please reach out to me. I'd love to hear about it. Seriously. So, thinking about the lemonade tiers, I want you to kind of place your relationship in there and then decide which tier you would like to be on. And then my goal with this podcast is not just to educate, but to also offer usable solutions. So please understand, if either of the two last examples, the toxic pee and abusive poop ones, I know it's crazy, but it's effective. It got your attention, right? If either of those sound like your relationship, frankly, if any of the last four, the ones that aren't thriving, I encourage you to seek individual therapy. But really, if those last two hit, seek individual therapy. Because with all due respect, like I said, codependency is not a four-letter word. You're struggling with codependency. You're struggling with people pleasing and overfunctioning and earning love through people. That is a very painful place to be, and I want you to be able to move out of that. So go see a therapist for individual therapy. Unfortunately, if you just do couples therapy at this point, there's a chance the dynamic in therapy actually might further gaslight you because the therapist has to coddle the difficult person so much to keep you in therapy, to keep that person in therapy, that it becomes this story of like you both need to make the same level of changes, and that's not true in these dynamics. Doesn't mean you don't need to make changes. You need to make changes around what you let people do to you. Okay, that's the distinction. But what you're engaging in is healable. I know we all flinch from identifying with these traits of codependency, but they're so common and there's nothing to be ashamed of. Most humans are struggling with some level of it. And hopefully I want that you can conclude that it's far worse to never get the support you need than to free yourself and admit you might struggle with it. So if you're not sure how to connect with a therapist, please just go to like an online directory like Psychology Today, Hello Alma, Headway. There are lots of other ones. Search for someone who takes your insurance. And then also, I'm going to recommend you search for somebody who does EMDR or IFS and parts work so that you can get to the subconscious underlying stuff. If you don't have insurance, consider at minimum calling your local abuse shelter. Again, this falls under toxic relationships too. You do not need to be getting hit to qualify for services through an abuse shelter. Like I said, there are so many different forms of abuse. Oftentimes, they'll offer free or low-cost services or groups to support victims of abuse. They'll also likely be able to connect you with low-cost therapy services. And don't forget, Google is great at that stuff too. So look for low-cost or no-cost therapy services in your area. Remember too, men can also be big victims of abuse. Doesn't always mean they're getting hit. It does sometimes. Truly, it does. But men really can be victims of this type of abuse. And I would encourage any man listening to also seek personal therapy and maybe consider joining a men's group as well. There can be men's group for perpetrators of abuse, and there can be men's group for people who just need support in general. And there can be men's group for those who are victims of abuse. So again, you can call your local shelter and see what options are available. Now, side note for any gendered person on the spectrum, if you're listening and you're recognizing that you may be the abuser in a lot of these situations, I want you to take a deep breath. And I want you to recognize that this is changeable too if you genuinely want to. If this is you, you're probably sitting in a just bucket of shame right now. But getting out of that is easier than you can think. I want you to see a therapist as well. And I want you to get really honest with yourself and with your therapist. You are not a bad person. You are a victim of abuse too at some level. I can promise you that. Not even knowing you, I can promise you that. And this is the way you learned to cope with it. But you are now responsible for changing the dynamic. When we know better, we do better, and we need to do better. So even if it's just low-level abuse, like I admitted already myself, I have done some of that. It is your responsibility to go change it. And frankly, it's an opportunity because I know you don't like operating here. It is excruciating. It is scary. It is lonely. And there's no level of intimacy that you can really achieve because there's no vulnerability. So to wrap it all up, at the end of the day, I am inviting everyone in a relationship that is problematic to please stop waiting for your partner to change. If you're deeply honest with yourself right now, you know it hasn't happened and there's no evidence to prove that it would happen. Even if your partner is engaging in healthy behaviors like services or things like that, are they doing it because you've made them, or are they doing it because they genuinely want to grow? I can tell you, I don't know you, and I know 9 times out of 10, they felt pressured. That is not going to create sustainable change. There are 8 billion people on this planet. There are other people available for you. I know you love this person. I know you genuinely have beautiful connections with them, but there is no amount of chemistry, charisma, skill level, money someone could make, whatever you want to call it, that can clean shit out of your lemonade. Just remember that. This is uncleanable. It is not fixable. I am convinced of that. So save yourself. You know better now. So do better for you. Do better for the other people in your life. If you have children, do better for them. Show them that you can walk away from something that isn't safe for you or for them. I expect a lot of everybody because I want you to have an extraordinary life. And I promise you, I expect the same of myself. So I hope this episode has helped you to understand the different levels of relationships and to reconsider waiting on someone to change. I hope you'll join me next time on the Resourced Podcast. And in the meantime, have a beautiful week. And as we always say here, stop chasing, start choosing. Thank you so much for joining me today on the Resourced Podcast. My hope is that you learned at least one practical tool you can apply to your life today to move in the direction of your dreams. If you found this content helpful, be sure to hit the subscribe button, leave a review, and consider subscribing to my email list, which is linked in the show notes. And remember, the journey of 1,000 miles begins with a single step. What step will you take today?